What's the cringiest way you've seen someone demonstrate a lack of self-awareness? Story 1 saw some lady at Costco throw a tantrum because the line was long. She kept screaming, "But I have a membership." You literally have to have a membership to shop there. The entire line had memberships. Story 2, I have a friend who is basically a young Michael Scott. Seriously, sometimes when watching The Office I cringe not because of what Michael is doing, but because it reminds me so much of my friend. One day our group of friends gets on the topic of what Office character we're most like. He loudly and immediately declares he thinks he's most like Ryan. Story 3, I'm a teacher, and there's this one guy I work with who is not a teacher, but sometimes helps in our classrooms. Every time he helps without fail, tell us about some kid he made a great connection with, who he feels like he really got through to, only for that kid to complain about how annoying and fake he is the next day. Teens recognize, respect realness over pretty much anything else. My ex's younger sister was a pre-med student. Whenever we had family gatherings, she would monopolize the conversations, talking about her knowledge in chemistry and how she was going to become a surgeon one day. No one else could get a word in edgeways. One day, she brought her new to a Christmas party. I guess she wanted to leave a good impression on him. After having talked about herself for more than 1 hour nonstop, she suddenly stopped and said, "I hate talking about myself. I'd rather listen to others." She then asked her how he was doing in school, only to cut him off and start talking about herself for another hour. I'm surprised that this post got so many comments and upvotes overnight. The whole experience I had at her house has actually affected me. I'm from a different country, and I grew up in a pretty strict family, so it was mind-boggling and shocking to witness such a spoiled and entitled person. The last straw was when the cat my ex and I were taking care of was dying from a kidney failure. We decided to stay with the cat for a few days before we put her to sleep. The night when the cat started breathing heavily, and we decided to bring her to the 247 vet to euthanize her before her pain became too much. Her sister came over to say goodbye, but she started monologuing about herself and bragging about her knowledge of medicine right next to the suffering cat for close to 30 minutes. I almost blew my top in front of her family, but fortunately my ex cut her off and we rushed to our car. It was having to hear our cat screaming in pain while I was driving to the vet. Had we got to the vet sooner, she wouldn't have had to suffer that much. I honestly started to see her younger sister as a monster after that experience. I know everyone has reasons to be narcissistic, and her family give her millions of excuses, but when I saw her how she was next to my cat dying, I decided to refuse to sympathize. Story 4, dude took multiple photos of the Declaration of Independence using flash photography. All while people yelled at him to stop. Other than the array of signs, you are advised multiple times to not use flash. They even have a special room to test if your camera is accidentally on flash. His response was just to listlessly stare at the workers and walk away. The sheer mixture of obliviousness and entitlement in his face made me momentarily lose faith in the idea of democracy while standing in the National Archive. Story 5, I was working at Yellowstone National Park, and someone asked me how we get the bears back into the cages every night. Had another person asked how we turn on Old Faithful in the morning, I told her we flush all the toilets in the park at the same time. Story 6, a bad classroom aide who no one wants to work with and who I got stuck with last year commented about how she keeps getting moved around because she's got so much experience. Story 7, a woman at my local coffee shop ordered a drink which was served in a paper to-go cup. She proceeded to berate the staff for not offering her a for here mug and explained to them how horrible that was for the environment. She then demanded a mug and poured her coffee into the mug and threw away the to-go cup. Story 8, my coworker right now. We have union jobs, so we can go to interviews for promotions and such while still being on the clock. He averages 1 interview a week and still hasn't been promoted or hired anywhere else. He's actually super pissed at me because I just started here last October and I'm leaving next week for my own promotion. Anyway, I heard him schedule one of his interviews the other day, and it was the cringiest thing ever. This was his opening line, "Gary, yes. Is this Pam? This is Gary. You probably don't remember me, but I interviewed for you a couple of months ago for the position." I must have been a bad boy, said like you would say if you had a baby talk fetish, though, because I didn't get a call back. "Do you remember me?" "No." "Well, anyway, I was calling to set up an interview for the position you have open over there." Names changed, obviously. When this dude found out about my promotion, he instantly turned purple and stormed out of the building. When he came back 30 minutes later, he walked into my cube and rubbed my back while telling me he wasn't mad at me, just mad at the system. I was so uncomfortable I wouldn't even look him in the eye. I never looked away from my computer screen. The dude is just not aware at all. Story 9, my cousin's friend came over to stay for a few weeks. Very vain, and before she left, she wrote a note to my uncle who is friendly to everyone saying how she had to sadly reject him even though she knows how much he is secretly in love with her. We all found the note together after she left addressed to him. He was with us and open in front of us. He was creeped out. Story 10, one of my current favorites, is the stop and block the supermarket aisle and have a conversation duo. This tops the block the aisle with the cart while you browse oblivious dolt. Story 11, I have a friend who is extremely susceptible to pop psychology articles on the internet. If she's seen some article on her Facebook feed about being a hypersensitive person or an introverted extrovert, ITLL be all you hear about for the next few weeks, and shall give her unqualified self-diagnosis to anyone who will listen. Shall start accentuating those traits, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's especially irritating because in psychology it's pretty well known that psychological self-assessment is extremely invalid, and that people are way worse at knowing themselves than they think. Story 12, I don't know if this counts, but Maya Mael was talking to this woman and asked her how far along she was pregnancy. She was not pregnant, but the lady took it in stride and was like, "Oh, I just haven't lost the baby weight from having my son." And Mael replies, "Oh, how old is he?" And she goes, "He's 7. She put both feet in her mouth in about a 15-second window. Story 13, a coworker I had who thought I was Mexican. I am not, just ambiguously beige. And he asked if my people always put maize. Yes, he said maize, not corn and salsa, and several other things about corn that I can't remember right now. He was really focused on Mexicans and corn. He also noticed a big necklace I was wearing once and asked me what significance it had in my culture. I told him I bought it at Target. So it just means that I like Target, LOL. He was reminded that I'm American several times. He just didn't get it for some reason. Oh, and the same coworker also regaled a black coworker with how he was the only white guy who could walk around the ghetto near where he lived at night because he had earned respect and they called him Holmes. Mind you, the cringy coworker in both these stories is not only so white he glows, but he lived in a very nice area, and there was definitely no ghetto anywhere near his upscale condo development. I witnessed the second one in person, and it felt like it took a lifetime for me to pick my jaw up off the floor and make up some reason that cringy coworker had to go see our manager in another building immediately. The cringe was so bad, it interrupted the time stream. Huh? Story 14, I saw a white woman at Taco Bell have a very loud, very condescending conversation with the guy behind the counter about how Taco Bell isn't authentic Mexican food. She obviously wanted the whole restaurant to hear, and obviously thought she was the only person at the restaurant, employees included, who was culturally aware enough to know this fact. She ended up storming out shouting, "Maybe if you guys had authentic Mexican food ID, you'd hear more." Oh, I should mention that the guy behind the counter was Mexican. Story 15, I have a coworker who shares details of her Crohn's disease at every monthly sales meeting. How can someone not know that they're making an entire room full of people uncomfortable, and that in a professional setting, personal health details shouldn't be shared ever? Story 16, I have a very close and dear friend whom I adore with all my heart. She's intelligent, warm, funny, and kind, just an incredible human being. That being said, she has regular psychic readings. She will then live her life according to what the psychic has told her, so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The reason I say psychic is because I've been to several of these with her, am interested, and it could do no harm. She tells me she gives nothing away, but the first thing she does is tell them what she wants to know, why she wants to know it, how she's got to this point, and what she'd like moving forward. I told them my name and got told my pet needed to go to the vet once. Oh, and one told me off the back of a horrendously abusive relationship that my ex was a delight, and we should get back together. Story 17 is stopping on railroad tracks, a demonstration of terrible self-awareness, because I see that all the time near my office, and I just can't fathom being that moronic. That takes stupidity to an entirely new level. Story 18, I was driving a forklift in an area open to the public. I'm basically in a narrow hallway about as wide as my forklift is long and have to spin the forklift around to grab the next pallet. I check my surroundings, then start to spin the forklift. As I reach the point where I'm basically touching the wall with my back end, a woman pops around the corner and decides to basically jump through the shrinking gap. Seeing movement, I immediately stop, saving her from being a smear on the wall, and tell her how close she was to being hit. She says, "Well, I wasn't hit." I told her she's welcome. Don't think she got it. Story 19, not super exciting, but I have a coworker who talks trash on another coworker all the time for having a long-term buddy. Meanwhile, her, as she calls it, not boyfriend, boyfriend is a 40-year-old man 10 years older than her who just moved out of his mom's house and won't commit to a relationship, but they hang out and are supposedly exclusive. What would you call that? Story 20A, 47-year-old woman I know who has been morbidly obese for most of her adult life. Well over 300 pounds now, criticizes her ex-husband's new wife and loves to point out, "I don't know what John sees in her. She has a big butt and big thighs." It is mind-boggling to hear this so often from her, and makes me wonder exactly what she sees when she looks at her mirror. Story 21. I do a workout camp with a group of people. I just started in January along with this other girl, Natalie, from our first workout. There was something about her that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. She struck me as the girl who would make the meeting last longer because she once shut up a couple of weeks in. She missed a workout or two. Well, the following week, she was back. Camp was done. I had become friends with this woman, Susan. She and I were walking back to our mats, but I got ahead of her, and that's when Natalie, out of nowhere, accosts Susan. Literally what she says is, yes, so I was on my way to camp on Friday, and I thought I had, so I did. And I wound up shitting myself. All Susan could say was a shocked, oh no, because why is she sharing this? But Natalie wasn't done. Yeah, and I don't know if it was because of the smell or actually being sick, but I wound up throwing up too. So I had to drive home in my own diarrhea and vomit. Charles had to clean the car. It was awful. Susan said she was glad she was feeling better. Natalie left, and I asked Susan, did you do anything to welcome that? Susan yelled a no, and then we cackled because, my God, several months later, we're at camp. Natalie walks up to me, who is sitting on the ground, turns around and has her, but in my face, and says, can you tell my pants are wet? I said no, and that's when she told me she thought she could hold it, but peed herself on her way there because she sneezed. And then she says, well, if you smell something, it's probably me, sweet God. Story 22 knew a sister of the groom, also maid of honor, who pitched a violent fit because the bride was going to wear a tiara for the ceremony. Therefore, the sister couldn't, literally screamed at both families. I'm the sister, for God's sake. Story 23, my ex going off on a tirade about how her brother was irresponsible for not paying his cable bill that month. 2 days after she told me she wasn't going to be able to give me her half of the expenses for the third month in a row. Story 24, I had a coworker who is a woman. She argued up and down that men don't exist and need to just pick a side. I've known her to date both men and women for sure, too. Bonus fun, her response to a question about Valentine's Day gift was, I don't need to give a gift. I brought the... Story 25, my uncle has been an alcoholic for 20 years. Only recently, he's been sober for 8 months since he finally got his card for medicinal marijuana. I have mine, too, so I take him to dispensary when I go. His mother pays for all his weed because he can't be trusted with a job. Recently, we went into my favorite dispensary, and he didn't have enough money to buy the 2 ounces. Deal he was anticipating, so I overhear him from the other room admitting his alcoholism, and how his mother has paid for his weed every single time he's come into the dude at the counter, hoping he would help my uncle out. It made the entire store feel weird. Story 26, karaoke night in Boston. Table of older black Annies in the front, bespectacled white dude on the stage, Biggie Smalls. Juicy, he said it, every time. Story 27, I watched one of my friends say to me, I don't get why I get bullied and don't have a girlfriend, and proceeded to Naruto run away when a girl talked to him. Story 28, boyfriend's dog passed away today. Ex messaged him asking for his ashes, then responds pretending to be another personality and starts talking about her relationship issues. Story 29 was at a party. A guy was publicly putting down his girlfriend, saying loud, such as like, you have any friends beside me. Then he joins my circle of conversation and starts doing Chris Rock bits like they were his original thoughts. I tried to give him an out, yeah, I heard that one. And he was like, what? It was as if he had a mental illness or was medicated. Host of the party eventually asked him to leave, told his girl she could stay. She stayed. Story 30, a girl, we called her Janet, because she was so similar to Arnold's cousin on the Magic School Bus, showed up in my program at university, constantly throwing out these outlandish claims about her accomplishments. I was applying to graduate schools at the time, and every time I mentioned a school not to her, she would throw in, oh, Yale, I got in there, I'm sorry, but if you get into Yale, you don't end up going to my school. She was also overweight, but supposedly qualified for the Boston Marathon. She didn't run in it, though, because she apparently broke her ankle so badly while hiking that the bone was sticking out her. So she told us the next day, while walking on it with a tiny wrap on it and an exaggerated limp. Oh, she also had a fiancé, also qualified for the Boston Marathon, but he was in med school in Michigan. She was 18. She didn't have a ring because he fake broke up with her because his buddies told him to. Somehow that was supposed to explain it. She was also the sort to start every comment in class with, well, I wrote a paper about this once, or my old school, it was this way, and was always asking, well, is there a page limit for this paper? I always write way too much, hee. Just the most obvious lies and a complete lack of awareness of how obvious and obnoxious this all was. Story 31, a very talkative coworker and claimed to be very humble, generous, and prim and proper. She once asked me how my weekend was only to not let me answer and spent 20-some minutes telling me about hers. And once she was done, just walked away. She was at the age of retirement, but was barely making ends meet and asking for money all the time. telling the manager she needed a reimbursement for every little thing gone wrong to her personal attire. Always talked about how her friends would tell her she could be a movie star, but she was too humble to accept that lifestyle. She was divorced, and she always complained how her kids were so disrespectful and ungrateful BC they never spoke to her anymore, and how they wouldn't give her any money, but she would give the jacket off her back for them. I could easily add more to this list, but I'll try to sum it up here. Despite her very friendly first impression, the more you listened to her, the more bizarre and hypocritical it got. You realized pretty quickly to avoid her at all costs. Story 32. In a convenience store near my house, the cashier, who is also the owner of the store, sometimes starts talking with the other 40-year-old ladies who are also buying, completely ignoring other customers who only wants to buy a soda or a bag of chips. That's why lots of people go to the other store instead. Story 33. One of my older coworkers thinks she knows how everyone should do their job. She bitched at me one day for talking to another coworker while working on filling a large number of orders. We work in a pharmacy. Literally the next day, during the same daily drop of orders, she and a different coworker stopped to sing a song and dance a little jig, then spent just as much time laughing at themselves each other. Not the first or last time she told me to do or not do something and then swiftly ignore her own instructions, but this really stood out. Story 34. My mother and I were out walking, and we came across an older couple we knew from the local church. Their eldest son had died the previous year from an inoperable brain tumor, and their younger son just moved out for university. Mom starts with, "Must be nice to have the house to yourself. More time for local church." Conversation devolves from there. She ignores all hints to drop the subject, including the mother stating they hadn't been back to the church since their son died. The couple were obviously horrified. I couldn't end the convo quick enough. Afterwards, my mother told me I was just being immature and had no conception of what polite adult conversation was like. Story 35. I'm a manager at a corporate restaurant, and there's a general manager and two other assistant managers like me. We work on a college campus, and so all of us assistant managers are students, which is why corporate excuse this bullshit, I guess. Well, my co-manager completely tormented this one employee, like this was movie-worthy harassment. He stalked this kid on every social media platform, was blocked on all of them, and just kept going at it. This employee got so upset with his advances one night that he left work in the middle of his shift. My co-manager ripped him a new one, telling him that he was going to be fired unless he came over to his house right that second. The employee refused, blocked him. Then my co-manager found him on another social media and continued to say that he would completely forget that this happened and he could still have his job if he just answered him and came over. This went on for nearly a week, and the said employee kept no call, no showing. He came in one day when my co-manager wasn't working and reported this to me and my actual boss. We told him that it is difficult to terminate a manager unless he wanted to file a report. He said he just didn't want anything more to do with this and was just going to quit. It was really sad, but we understood where he was coming from. Well, during this time, there was another employee who was like 50 years old flirting with some of the younger female employees. He had also flirted with me and asked me out. So when one girl came forward, it was definitely believable that he was being inappropriate. He wasn't harassing anybody, but he was making other girls uncomfortable. Literally the same day that this poor harassed boy came in and told us everything, showed us all messages, and quit, my co-manager freaked out on this one guy. We told him we were all working on it, and he literally threw a filing cabinet over and said, "There is no gray area when it comes to harassment. I am firing blank right now." And he went out and fired this guy, ripped him to shreds in front of the whole kitchen, and yelled harassment the whole time. This one guy wasn't harassing anyone. He was a little slow and barely ever spoke and had asked a few younger girls to dinner. Yes, it was uncomfortable, and yes, it would have resulted in a conversation with him. But he did not do anything wrong at that point. It was just so insane to all of us that my co-manager literally fired this man for asking employees on a date the same day that this 18-year-old kid came in and told us about the torture he was putting him through. He literally said, "There's no gray area when it comes to harassment like you, dude." Story 36. Yesterday, some lady in a wheelchair crossed a busy 4-lane street while the light was green. No hustle at all. Dog 5 foot out in front at the end of its leash. Nearly caused multiple accidents, caused people had to swerve to avoid her. Story 37. Ex-friend was complaining about how she was so nice and always there for other people, but no one was there for her. In an attempt to empathize, I said, "I understand entirely. I felt the same way," when she cut me off mid-sentence to say, "No offense, but I don't have the capacity to deal with your problems." She then went on to talk about her dad blowing up babies in Vietnam. Story 38. There is this manager at my old job. He is some kind of youth group pastor and tells everyone he's a virgin saving himself for marriage. Talks about the family unit has broke down, blah, blah, blah. I went out with my ex and loved our server. She's a cute little single mother, all bubbly. She was working in a sports bar restaurant. Hard-working girl. So I said, come work on my restaurant. It's super easy, large checks and big tips. No more working here, but off in the heat for $5 tips. So I tell her, say my name, they'll hire you. A few weeks later, I see her on the floor. She is super excited about making more money. The virgin manager is not a virgin. He says that to trick these young girls into sleeping with him. He slept with the girl I got hired and she quit. Now we all know the game. He is some undercover predator telling young vulnerable girls he is a virgin and Christian to get. He makes me sick. Story 39, one woman who is 40 and in great shape, but absolutely desperate to be married to another woman who is funny and sweet, but overweight. I can't believe someone like you is married and am not. No lie. And it didn't even occur to her that it was insulting. She's too much of a narcissist to realize that. Story 40, probably this entire article. Story 41, former colleague, who was more than a little bit of an, was complaining about the process for hiring. He recounted how in the last 2 interviews before my former employers hired him, that after the executive director level interviews, he was then asked to spend an afternoon with the rank and file. According to him, everything was going fine, that he dazzled the executives and had solutions to all their challenges and issues. But somehow, after the team met him, he was informed that there would be no offer, that the team rejected him. He was baffled. What could possibly lead the team to reject me? He asked. Our response, well, they met you, didn't they? He was an insufferable, and given a chance, I would have rejected him too, but our leadership didn't ask. I endured almost 1 year on the same team as him after hitting my head against conference room tables in frustration during the monthly transatlantic team meetings. He lasted maybe over 2 after that. He didn't understand why they canned him and fought the dismissal, I bet never understanding why. In another example, he wore a historically accurate SS uniform to Liberation Days in Belgium. Didn't know why folks didn't ask for selfies with him or compliment the cosplay. Story 42, a friend would wear bright lipstick and attention-grabbing clothing. She didn't wear other makeup, just a gaudy, sparkly pink that didn't go with her skin or red hair, and usually ended up smeared immediately, and shed dress in Lolita fashion, very frilly and unusual to see in our region. She would then either brag or complain about all the attention she was getting and how everyone was looking at her lips and wanted to kiss her good or gross, depending on her mood, or looking at her body and either thinking she looked so sexy or judging her, again, depending on her mood. I knew her for 7 years. She never noticed that the opinions she saw were all in her head, and the looks were just because she was doing something odd and attention-grabbing. Story 43, my friend, after a sleepover party, texts me to check if he left his phone. I call him, and he says, hey, did you find it? I hung up and texted him, no, I haven't heard from him since. It's been 3 years, but I do like to imagine after he realized he had his phone that he sat there disappointed in himself for 20 minutes. Story 44, see a lady scream and cuss at her kid about cussing, saying she never taught her that kind of f***ing language, and she doesn't know where she got it from. I want to slap her so bad. Story 45, I work with a highly intelligent, but socially inept gentleman who constantly makes me uncomfortable with his random remarks, commentary, and invasive lingering. I'm a school counselor, and the policy is when my door is closed, you do not enter unless you knock beforehand. I was on the phone with my deployed husband in Afghanistan, letting him know his aunt had suddenly passed away. I was crying and red-faced and sniffling because the conversation was quite emotional. I happened to glance up, and this colleague is just standing there staring at me. He said, I knocked, but you didn't respond, and I need a stapler. I am still looking at him, completely dumbfounded, as he walks to my desk, takes my stapler, and then proceeds to leave. He closes the door, then immediately opens it again and says, I like the new smell of your air freshener, and leaves. Story 46, I had a neighbor who was living on unemployment and hated socialism and Obama because he's going to give my money to a bunch of freeloaders. He did not work, had his insurance through the ACA, and was basically the stereotypical Chicago welfare queen that he hated so much. Story 47, I was standing behind a guy and his girlfriend waiting to get into a comedy show about a week ago, and he was going on and on to another couple about how much he was a fan of ciders, as the other couple was suggesting restaurants they try while visiting our town. This was strike one. Lo and behold, I get the table behind this dork and his girlfriend. And when the comic did some crowd work at the beginning of the show, he asked the crowd to try and think of something he, the comic, would not do for $1 million. Cider guy chimed in at the top of his lungs, out am I? But the comic didn't hear him, so he repeated it 2 more times. The room went silent. It was like something a 7-year-old would say. I cringed for a full 5 minutes. Story 48, I know a guy who's a textbook narcissist. Grandiose sense of self-importance. constantly needs people to praise him, sense of entitlement, especially when it comes to bullying and belittling others. I'm not a mental health professional or anything, but it's a perfect fit. His favorite insult to fling around when someone does something he doesn't like X. Not invite him to a party because he mercilessly creeps on every woman he meets and goes into long political tirades, is to call them a narcissist. He also just went on a Facebook tirade about how he's tired of women brushing him off, even though he's so kind and empathetic, eventually coming to the conclusion that all women are, among other things, rotten, selfish vultures who only care about finding sugar daddies. He is extremely unhappy right now that the commenters aren't agreeing with him. Story 49, my friend who prided herself on her empathy and listening skills was the very definition of privilege. I don't use the word that often, but her family was insanely rich and she grew up with nothing out of her reach. She took to responding to me if I was going through a rough patch by either comparing her laughable experiences to mine or ignoring me entirely and going hey race a drawing I did at work because she worked for her older sister and basically did nothing all day. She also said she was going to be a famous comic artist, and her blockbuster idea was yet another YA nuclear apocalypse idea with flat characters and predictable plot. Also, her style was objectively awful, and she legit drew her main character non-white like a monkey. I withheld comment on that. Maybe it would have been the right thing to point it out, but I kind of hope it gets her beaten up someday. Story 50, a colleague went into an explanation to me of the difference between paraplegics and quadriplegics. While I was right in front of her in my wheelchair, I am a paraplegic LOL. Story 51, there's a guy in some of my classes who, in the same conversation, stated that he was just over a 50 average in most of his classes, was only showing up to one of his finals because that was the only class where he could actually fail if he got a 0, and that he was definitely going to Harvard to become a lawyer. He leeches all of his opinions from Ben Shapiro, far-right journalists. In places like 4chan, he is never open to changing his mind, never admits a fault, truly believes he is one of the most intelligent people alive. He argues by getting really loud and talking fast, as well as interrupting you, so you can't get a word in. Again, he will not listen to any other opinion once he's settled on his. Every opinion he has is just objective truth according to him. His dad is fairly wealthy, and so he thinks everything will go his way because of it. Nobody actually likes him. He's just a very unpleasant person to be around. I do actually feel pretty bad for him sometimes because everyone hates him and he doesn't seem to be aware that he can just try to be less abrasive and more open to other ideas and not argue with everything ever. In 100 Shuris on Reddit, and I honestly think it would be hilarious if he found this because he would not know this is about him. Story 52, my friend bragged about how he was going to be away from home all the time to continue dating this girl from university. When I asked her how their relationship was going, she didn't even recognize his name. Story 53, last weekend, I was at a friend's birthday party. One friend brought one of his climbing mates. That dude was freakingly obnoxious and drank way too much. When some people started playing Never Have I Ever, I sat next to them. That dude stood next to me after some time, spit raining on me with every yell word of his. He noticed but proceeded, after a few looks I, as politely as possible, pointed out that he has a very moist pronunciation. He shrugged and proceeded. Finally, I gave him the dead and asked him to get a chair. He got a chair, but he didn't sit down. At this point, we started running out of beer, so I shared mine with my best friend. Once the Never Have I Ever turn was on me to drink, my beer was gone. Looking to my right, that Niagara Falls dude slobbered my beer. Story 54, I took my car to get its yearly inspection. Something should have only taken 15 minutes. I walked in right behind a Karen on the prowl who needed a tune-up and an oil change and all that. We get our rides checked into the auto spa and pop a squat in the lounge area. The mechanic comes out. Apparently, there were 2 cars brought in early that day, and both of them were super messed up, and it was taking longer than expected. So he was the only guy who could work on her car and my car. So he asked the lady if she would mind him doing my car first, since it would be super quick. She scoffs and says she was there first. I remarked that I was literally a second behind her. She keeps insisting that she was there first and deserved to have her car done first. I pointed out the only reason she was first was because I stopped and held the door for her. She's pitching a fit, keeps repeating, I was here first, I was here first, I was here first, sounding more and more like D.W. Reed from Arthur. I didn't have anything else to do that day, and my phone had full battery, so I graciously conceded and told him to take her car first. I failed inspection, but the mechanic fixed the problem and passed me, so I ended up walking out before her. When I went outside, her car was still in the bay door, but hadn't been looked at yet. As I was paying, she was behind me screeching, I was here first, I was here first, I was here first. I can't say it was deliberate or not, but I still tipped the mechanics decently as I collected Old Faithful and drove to Chick-fil-A ET for a milkshake and waffle fries. Story 55, a very tall guy cut his way to the front of Concerted was Chill Festival, so people let him while wearing sombrero. I tapped his shoulder and politely told him he was blocking people's view as if he wasn't blocking enough being so tall, so he needed to take it off. He was annoyed but did it. I got 2 high fives from people around me. If he didn't comply, I could have easily gotten security to handle it. It was so obvious to everyone he just cut in from the middle of the set. If people give you an inch, don't take a mile. Also, if anyone is reading this wearing any hat that isn't a baseball cap at a concert is rude. People behind you are trying to see.